Shalom HaDavarniks. Welcome again to the next session of The Romans and Russians Are Coming, Oh My. We're in session 3 of the independent class, and session 3 of the independent class can be viewed as session 46 of the First Regathering Modern Israel as we look at Israel future. All right, so session 3 or First Regathering session 46. Let's take a quick review of where we've been. We're in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 2, verses 32 through 45. Last week, we saw that Daniel was in the Persian period. In the middle of verse 39, he then switched to the far future, the Greek period, and finished up verse 39. In other words, we moved from the breast and arms of silver, which represented Medo-Persian oligarchy, and we move down the statue, down the timeline. Remember, the statue is a timeline of the times of the Gentiles. We move down the timeline to the belly and thighs of brass, and we come to the Hellenistic democracy. Here's the Hellenistic Empire that went from 330 BC to 164 BC. And remember, when the Hellenistic Empire took over, this was the first time a Western nation had dominated Israel. Before, she had been dominated by Eastern nations, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia. But now we have a new situation on our hands. Then we moved in verses 40 to 43 to the far distant future and the Roman period. In other words, we moved down one more step down the timeline from the belly and thighs of brass to the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay. And this was Roman imperialism and republicanism. The foundation of human governments here is very, very bad. Remember, this statue that represents human governments is tottering in the breeze. It's ready to go over at any moment. I'm going to review this a number of times because this next bit of information is so critically important, and that's the definition of imperialism. I want you to have this definition cemented firmly in your mind. What is imperialism? The policy of the Roman Empire. Imperialism is the policy of extending a nation's authority by, number 1, territorial acquisition, or, number 2, by the establishment of economic and political hegemony, leadership over other nations. Remember, Rome, the final kingdom, will use both techniques. Here is a map of Rome during its United stage, when it introduced imperialism. And imperialism it was introduced into Israel starting in 63 with Pompey's conquest of Jerusalem, and it went to 364 AD. And again, for a second time, another Western power dominates Israel. This is the Roman Empire at its fullest extent. You can see that we've been only looking at the right side of the map, which is maybe 25 to 30% of the Roman Empire. It was quite huge. And this was the Roman Empire as it tried to extend its influence through imperialism using the technique of territorial acquisition. And you can see the territory goes all the way from Babylon and Mesopotamia all the way over to Spain and the west coast of Africa. Rome was a huge empire, but it can only go so far. Territorial acquisition can only go so far, and then things began to break down. And they did when the Roman Empire split in two. It split along that line pretty much into the Eastern Roman Empire with the capital of Byzantium, and the Western Roman Empire with the capital at Rome. Now, we reviewed the times of the Gentiles and the governments that would dominate the times of the Gentiles. We saw that Babylonian autocracy is government by one sinful man. The result was relative order. Oligarchy that characterized Medo-Persia is government by a small sinful elite. That provides less order. Why? Because autocracy, there's only one cook in the kitchen. But with oligarchy, you now have more cooks in the kitchen. So the kitchen is less orderly. Then came Hellenistic democracy, government by the sinful majority, and there's still less order because now nobody's in the restaurant. Everybody's in the kitchen. Whether you be a cook or a diner, you're all in the kitchen sharing your opinions. And the cook's opinion, the cooks, all the cooks' opinions rule because they're the majority there. Then we come to the Roman imperialism and republicanism. This is government by the sinful majority, but the minority gains individual rights. This breaks down into chaos. Why? Because not only the cooks have their right to say how the kitchen operates, but now the diners do too. Now everybody gets to share their opinion and set up their own kitchen within a kitchen. And so the kitchen breaks down into chaos, and then eventually there's no order at all, no government at all, but anarchy. We can see the influence of Rome as it extends its influence through political and economic hegemony in little ways. If you look for them, you'll see them. And the way that struck me the most was the G20 summits that have been held over the years. Here's the Pittsburgh summit of 2009, and if you look at all the delegates, all the leaders of all these 20 countries, they all look the same. They're all dressed in Western dress. Dark suit, white shirt, and a colorful tie. All except this guy. He's got his turban on it. And then the Seoul Summit 2010, same thing. A room of clones. All these leaders are clones of one another. They all want to be in the Roman club. They all want to look the same. They all want to dress the same. They are on the same page. So here's a close-up of some of these delegates. We are one. The world is becoming one big, happy, international iron and clay family. Some of these countries are strong, and some of them are very weak. What is imperialism? The policy of extending a nation's authority by territorial acquisition. That's the past. That's the past for Rome. Or by the establishment of economic and political hegemony, leadership over other nations. And that is going on, and it is going worldwide. Here's the G20 summit in 2012. Again, our room full of clones. And finally, 2014, just last year. Again, they all look the same, except guess who? The Arab. Notice in the front row we have this Arab fellow dressed in Arab garb. He's not getting with the program, is he? And that's quite interesting due to the fact that the Arab Spring has happened. Well, then we examine the idea that the final kingdom is Islam, and the Antichrist is Islamic. And I explained to you why I did not hold to that position. The smiting stone came into view and was explained. The smiting stone crashed into the feet of the statue and it was vaporized. And then the smiting stone grew and became a kingdom that encompassed the entire world. And that's a picture of Jesus and the second coming and the Messianic kingdom going worldwide. So that brings us now to point double parentheses 6 on your outline, and another alternate view. We looked at the alternate view that Islam was the final kingdom. Now we're going to look at amillennialism. And all that I've taught you is contra amillennialism. It's in contrast to amillennialism. Now what is amillennialism? Well, amillennialism, the word means no kingdom. Basically, that's what the idea is. No millennium, no literal 1,000-year millennium, no Messianic kingdom in a literal sense. So amillennialism identifies the fifth kingdom, this final kingdom to come, represented by the smiting stone. Amillennialism identifies that fifth kingdom as being the church. It's the church, and it was set up during the first coming. That's when Jesus came. That's when the smiting stone appeared. That's their basic position in very broad terms. But this can't be true for a number of reasons, and the reasons are listed in your outline here. A, the establishment of this kingdom, that is the Messianic kingdom, parallels the other. It's on earth. It's not spiritual in heaven as the Amils teach. It's on earth. It grows to cover, it becomes a mountain that uncovers the whole earth. So it's a very earthly kingdom. But the amillennialists speak of the fact that, hold the position that the kingdom is a spiritual kingdom in heaven. That's not in accord with the data in the prophecy. B, the next one. This kingdom is established during the 10 division stage. It smashes into the 10 toes of the statue. It's not established during the first century because that wasn't true in the first century. Rome was not divided into 10 kingdoms in the first century. Rome was united in the first century. So that doesn't fit the data. Thirdly, this kingdom, the final kingdom, the fifth kingdom, brings a decisive blow to the fourth Gentile empire. The church age did not do that. In fact, Jesus was executed on a Roman cross under Roman law. So there wasn't a decisive blow smashed onto Rome or the fourth kingdom. Point D. This kingdom, the Messianic kingdom, conquers the whole world. It goes worldwide. The church has not done that, and the church will not do that. There's plenty of places in the world the church has not reached at this point. Point E. The church is not a political organization. Even in outward organization, earthly, physical organization, it is to be subject to Caesar and not rule over Caesar. That's Romans 13:1. That's what the Rabbi Shaul says, Romans 13:1. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities. For there's no authority except from God, and those who exist are established by God. So as long as Caesar doesn't demand of us something immoral, we are to be in submission to Caesar, not the reverse. So that doesn't fit the data. Amillennialism just doesn't fit the biblical data. F. For the church to equal this kingdom, for the church and the Messianic kingdom to be the same thing, that would require a gradual taking control in place of the sudden catastrophic destruction of the fourth kingdom. You see, the passage requires a sudden dramatic victory, the stone coming in and smashing things. And that hasn't happened at all. So the church has not done that. G. An amillennialist must postulate the fact that the church has overcome Gentile governments, Gentile kingdoms, or will overcome them. But the church has not done that, and it will not do so. The biblical data doesn't indicate the church defeating kingdoms. H. Smiting. In the spread of the gospel, if you interpret the smiting stone as the spread of the gospel coming in and destroying these kingdoms by smiting, you're evangelizing, using the term smiting to evangelize. Smiting in the spreading of the gospel is out of harmony with Christian ethics and the New Testament. That's a crusader approach, you guys. That's a crusader approach. Here's the crusaders. We proclaim. We don't smite. We persuade. We don't smite. Okay? But, the crusaders convert or die. Well, that's not the point. That's not the command given to the church. That's not the command. So amillennialism is based on an allegorical hermeneutic. That is a symbolic hermeneutic. That the plain meaning of the text is not truly what the text means. And the most graphic example of that allegorical hermeneutic is when you come to the word Israel in the prophets, it really means the church. Doesn't really mean ethnic Israel, literal physical Israel, the Jewish people. It really means the church. That's the approach. Now, how do amillennialists get to this position? Well, let me show you. This is a book, Whose Promised Land, by Colin Chapman. And we'll be taking some quotes out of this book, and you'll get an idea of how amillennialists come to their position. Now, my opinion of this book, that's my opinion of this book. It ain't worth it. Don't buy it. Anyway. All right. The first position is that Jesus reinterpreted the Old Testament. In other words, what the Old Testament said, it didn't really mean. It has to be reinterpreted properly. And this is R.T. France's position quoted in Whose Promised Land. R.T. France states, "The inevitable conclusion seems to be that Jesus presented his ministry as the fulfillment of the whole future hope of the Old Testament, the day of the Lord and the coming of the Messiah. Even when the original reference seems to be focused on a political restoration of God's people, especially true in Isaiah 35, Jesus can find the fulfillment in his own ministry." That underlined statement is a telling statement. He admits there that the original reference is focused on a political restoration of God's people, a literal restoration of the Jews to a kingdom. But even when it looks that way, it doesn't really mean that at all. It really is simply a symbolic representation of Jesus' ministry. And Jesus saw it fulfilled in his own ministry. So here's how he's reinterpreting. In other words, the Old Testament saints were totally in the dark. They couldn't understand the Old Testament revelation properly until Jesus came and reinterpreted the whole thing for them. So God was not clear. God was not clear when he wrote the Old Testament, is the implication of this position. N.T. Wright also holds this position that Jesus reinterpreted everything to fit a new model. Again, quoted from Whose Promised Land, page 151, N.T. Wright writes, "He, Yeshua, had not come to rehabilitate the symbol of Holy Land." See, the Holy Land is simply a symbol. We don't want to really view it in literal, crass, literal terms. He, Jesus, had not come to rehabilitate the symbol of Holy Land, but to subsume it within a different fulfillment of the kingdom. Things are different in the New Testament from what they were in the Old Testament. A different fulfillment which would embrace the whole creation. By the way, folks, the Messiah's ministry is always intended to be for the whole world, and it's stated many, many times in the prophets that the Messiah's ministry is to go worldwide. So this is a misleading statement. So Jesus didn't come to rehabilitate the symbol of the Holy Land, but to subsume it within a different fulfillment of the kingdom which would embrace the whole creation. Jesus spent his whole ministry redefining what the kingdom meant. In other words, God had not properly presented his material, his revelation, in the Old Testament. It had to be redefined, reinterpreted, so people would understand it correctly. Colin Chapman holds to a very similar kind of position, and he explains Anthony A. Hoekema's position, and he says that this is pretty much what he believes. Here's Colin Chapman's words on page 175. Anthony A. Hoekema, an American theologian, presents the interpretation of John's millennium, that's the Messianic kingdom, the millennium, 1,000 years. He presents the interpretation of John's millennium, which is most consistent with the approach developed in this book. By the way, that statement lets you know that Amil positions are very, very inconsistent because they depend on man's imagination. They aren't rooted in Scripture, but in symbolism dreamed up in a man's mind. So they're very inconsistent. They're all over the place. But he finds a position that is most consistent with what he believes. So he presents it. According to this understanding, the millennium, that's the 1,000-year Messianic kingdom as we believe it, the millennium has nothing whatever to do with Jewish sovereignty over the land of Palestine. Nothing to do with it at all. Rather, it describes what takes place during the entire history of the church, beginning with the first coming of Christ. So in other words, you guys, we are living in the millennium right now because it's just a symbol of the church age. My response to that, God help us. God help us if this is the millennium. If what we're experiencing today is the millennium, we are in trouble. All right. So, to be an amillennialist, you have to eisegete. not exegete, but eisegete. You have to read your presupposed theology into the text. Well, our position at HaDavar is a literal position based on the golden rule of interpretation. And it's very similar to the well-known Jewish exegete Rashi. Here's Rashi's position. Here's the Jewish position. This is the traditional Jewish position built on a consistent literal hermeneutic. Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, he lived from 1040 to 1105. What was Rashi's comments on Daniel 2:44? This comes from The Complete Tanakh with Rashi by Davka. Here's his comment on Daniel 2:44. It's built on a consistent literal hermeneutic. This is the result of consistent literal interpretation. In the days of these kings, when the kingdom of Rome is still in existence, he agrees. He would agree with me that Rome never died, that it just changed form. In the days of these kings, when the kingdom of Rome is still in existence, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. The kingdom of the Holy One, blessed be He, which will never be destroyed. Is the kingdom of who? It's the kingdom of the Messiah. It will crumble and destroy all these kingdoms. So we are very much in agreement at this point, Rashi and myself. Again, it's a result of consistent literal interpretation. Consistent exegesis leads to consistent positions. All right, let's take a look at our time frames now. Daniel has been in the kingdom, way over on the right here. Let me see if I can get out of the way. There we go. See that corner? Okay, in verse 44, he's been in the kingdom. Now, he moves all the way back. He jumps all the way back to the right side of our left side of our chart to the prophet's present time, his present time in chapter 2, verses 45 through chapter 7, verse 4. And as he does, he summarizes the dream for Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel 2:45, first part of the verse, he speaks of the stone. He begins by speaking about the smiting stone. Inasmuch as you saw a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron and the bronze and the clay and the silver and the gold. So the stone was cut without hands. The stone is the Messiah. The mountain there is God's kingdom. And the stone is cut out without hands, and that is Yeshua. When symbols are used in the Bible, they are used consistently 95% of the time. And whenever a stone is used symbolically in the Bible, it is often a symbol of the Messiah. And so you have a stone motif describing the Messiah. And you see on your outline there, I believe, eight sections of Scripture that make up the stone motif. We'll look at 4 examples of this motif and how it starts out in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, and continues into the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah. So let's start with Psalm 18:22, 118:22. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. So speaking of the Messiah there. Isaiah 28:16, another example. Therefore, says the Lord God, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a costly cornerstone, for the foundation firmly placed. He who believes in it will not be disturbed. Again, speaking of the Messiah. Then this whole idea comes over into the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament. For example, Acts 4:11. He is the stone, speaking of Yeshua. He is the stone which was rejected by you, the builders, but which became what? The chief cornerstone. Notice the reference back to the previous verses. And then, 1 Corinthians 10:4, the identity is made rock solid. Paul writes, and all drank the same spiritual drink. They were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them. And the rock was Mashiach. The rock was Christ. The rock was Yeshua. So he is the smiting stone. Now this stone will bring the times of the Gentiles to an end. So the appearance of the stone here represents the second coming. Here the Gentile Governments tottering in the breeze, ready to go over it at any time, top-heavy with a terrible, horrible foundation, and the stone comes, it crashes into the foundation, the human governments are vaporized and disappear, and the stone grows into a mountain that covers the entire world. So the mountain there is the kingdom of God. The stone is Yeshua. The mountain is the Messianic kingdom. And again, in Scripture, when a mountain is used symbolically, it's usually a symbol of a king, kingdom, or throne. King, kingdom, or throne. Now it speaks of the Messianic kingdom. All right, let's take a look at God's view of superior government. What does God think of governments? Well, we'll look at the type of government, we'll explain what it's government by, we'll evaluate it, and we'll get the result. So God's view of superior government. Now this should be in your handouts. First of all, first type of government is theocracy. This is government representing, that's characteristic of the Messianic kingdom. Messianic government, theocracy, government by God. So this is government by a sinless God-man, the Messiah. God's evaluation of this type of government, it's superior because it results in order and harmony and righteousness and justice. You can add a lot of things to that result column. See, God's government, theocracy, is the mountain, the unmovable mountain that never changes, that you can bet on. You know, this is a picture of Mount Everest, you guys. Mount Everest has been there a long time. Do you think Mount Everest is ever going to move? No. That's the way God's kingdom is. It is solid as a rock. It's the strongest foundation you can ever get. It never changes. It's always there. Now, in contrast, human governments are tottering in the breeze. They have no stability. They change constantly, and they have an inadequate foundation, and so they will disappear. You cannot depend on human governments. So that brings us to the next line in the chart, and the first human government is autocracy, represented by Babylon. Government by one sinful man. Well, it's inferior, although it does create relative order. The third type of government is oligarchy, represented by Medo-Persia. This is government by a small, sinful elite. It's more inferior. It brings less order. Why? As I said before, under autocracy, you only had one cook in the kitchen. Plenty of order. But now, you got a committee in the kitchen. Too many cooks in the kitchen. They spoil the broth. Then comes democracy, represented by the Hellenistic kingdom. Government by the sinful majority. It's even more inferior because there's still less order. Now, like I said, using my example here, instead of having all the cooks in the kitchen, you now have all the customers in the kitchen as well. So there's still less order. And finally, imperialism and republicanism, represented by Rome. Now it's government by the sinful majority, but the minority gains individual rights. And this is still more inferior because there's chaos and anarchy. Now the customers that should not at all be dealing with recipes are setting up their own recipes and setting up their own kitchen within the kitchen. And it's just a chaotic kitchen, and soon it breaks down into total anarchy. So theocracy, that's God's ideal government and superior government. You know, guys, we were built for theocracy. Human beings were built to be governed by God. We were built for theocracy. We will thrive under theocracy, under the Messianic kingdom. I'm looking forward to it. The Messianic kingdom will be absolutely fair and absolutely just. And that'll take care of the human rights issues that we struggle so much with today. It'll also be absolutely prosperous. And that'll take care of the economic realm, which is, again, one of the great problems of human governments, human rights, and poverty, suffering. That'll all be gone in the kingdom. Everyone will have their proper rights and responsibilities, and no one will suffer want. And finally, this type of government will absolutely have no corruption. It'll be a pure government, no corruption, and this takes care of one of the major problems in the human political realm. So many governments of the world are corrupt. All right, let's compare then. Point 4. Do a quick comparison of God's government and the Gentile empires. double parentheses 4. First of all, in regard to origin, in regard to the Gentile empires, the emphasis is on human power and human involvement. But God's kingdom emphasizes divine power and divine involvement. Now, in regard to duration, Gentile empires are temporary. They're here today and gone tomorrow. Like a breeze, blown away by the breeze. But God's kingdom is eternal. It's that mountain I showed you. So the Messianic kingdom is the prelude to the eternal state. What starts out with the Messianic kingdom transitions into the eternal state. And in regard to power, the Gentile empires are each overcome by the succeeding empire. So they have limited power. Always somebody rises up stronger than them and defeats them. But God's kingdom, it's unconquerable. It has unlimited power. And I want to show you that in Revelation 20, verses 7 through 9. When the 1,000 years are completed, that's the beginning of the kingdom, God's kingdom on earth, 1,000-year Messianic kingdom. When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison. He's an enemy of the Messiah, enemy of God. And he will come out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and gather them together for war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore. So it looks like history is repeating itself. You know, Babylon is defeated by Medo-Persia. Medo-Persia defeated by Greece. Greece defeated by Rome. The Messianic kingdom defeated by Satan. Is that what's going to happen? He's come out to defeat them. Will God's kingdom go down in defeat? And they came up on the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city. Oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Will God make it? And fire came down from heaven and devoured them. Boom, just like that. God just states his word, and this competing power is vaporized. You see, God's kingdom has unlimited power and is unconquerable. It does not follow the pattern of human kingdoms, the Gentile kingdoms. All right, we're just about to the end of verse 45, and I see it's time for your break. So let's go ahead and take your break, and we'll pick it up at this point, point 7 on your outline. All righty, we're back. I hope you had a good break, good fellowship. Okay, let's pick it up on point 7, the conclusion of chapter 2. And that begins with verse 45, the second part of the verse. Second part of verse 45 reads, "The great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future, so the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy." Some points to note here. The great God has made known to the king what will come to pass. See, this revelation did not come from idols. It didn't come from Marduk or anyone else. It didn't come from wood or stone. It came from the true and living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Secondly, the dream is certain, says Daniel. Daniel has accurately described the dream. He's verified his supernatural connection. He is a true prophet. So point C, the interpretation is sure. Nebuchadnezzar, you can trust what Daniel has said. And so that brings chapter 2 to a close. But before we move on to chapter 7, I'd like to share with you some remarks by Mark Twain. Here's Mark Twain. He wrote, Samuel Clemens, he wrote an article called The Inscrutable Enigma. It appeared in another article in Harper's Magazine in 1898 under the title Concerning the Jews. This was 1898, just as the modern Zionism movement is starting to perk. Remember, it's been going on since about the 1840s, 1839, 1840. Now it's 1898. The modern Zionist movement is beginning to go. By the way, these comments I picked up from Israel My Glory, the November-December issue in 2009 on page 6. Here's what Mark Twain said, The Inscrutable Enigma. If the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous, dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contribution to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world, in all the ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. And notice who he mentions here. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian arose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, and then faded away to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Well, I would disagree with him there. Rome's still around. But notice he mentions Babylon, Persia, Greek, and Rome, and how they have fallen, all except Rome, of course. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight. They sit in twilight now, or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, as now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. And here's the enigma. What is the secret of his immortality? Well, I'm sorry, Mark. I can give you an answer. I'm sorry you don't know the answer there. You don't know your Bible well enough. And by the way, folks, it has nothing to do with us as Jews. It has everything to do with God. Okay? Everything to do with God. And it rests, the secret of Jewish immortality rests on the covenant God has made with the Jewish people. He's made an unconditional, eternal covenant with the Jewish people. It first appears in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Now the Lord said to Avram, our progenitor, the Lord said to Avram, go forth from your country and from your relatives and your father's house to a land. So he's promised us a land. I will show you. He has nothing to do with the Jewish people. God's going to show us and give us the land. And I will make you a great nation. The fact that we're a nation today depends on God. He's going to make us into a great nation. And I will bless you. And any blessing we've experienced comes from God. And make your name great. And so you will be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you. And the one who curses you, I will curse. So Israel is to be a blessing to the world. But of course, the world is responsible to respond positively to those blessings. The one who curses you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's the secret, Mark. I wish you were aware of it. All right, this brings us to the end of chapter 2. And now we're ready for chapter 7. Remember, chapter 7 is part of the law of recurrence. It's repetition with additional information. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at the connection between chapter 2 and 7 using this chart. I've entitled this chart the four Gentile empires of the final four Gentile empires of Daniel. The course of the times of the Gentiles, Babylon through Rome. All right, let's start here. In Daniel 2, the revelation was the image of a man. The man, of course, was the timeline. We saw the Babylonian Empire, the head of gold, followed by the Medo-Persian Empire, the chest and arms of silver, followed by the Greek or Hellenistic Empire, the belly and thighs of bronze, followed by Rome, the iron and clay, composite government, composite legs and feet of iron and clay. And then we saw the Messianic kingdom come on the scene. That's the rock, Yeshua, the mountain, the kingdom. Now we're going to move into Daniel chapter 7 and take a look at a few verses in Daniel 7. Now in Daniel 7, 4 beasts represent the times of the Gentiles. In Daniel 2, the image of a man did. In Daniel 7, 4 beasts represent the times of the Gentiles. We start out with Babylon, represented by the lion-like beast. Medo-Persia represented by the bear-like beast. Greece represented by the leopard-like beast. Rome represented by the composite beast. And then the Messianic kingdom is given to the believers. Now there's even more information in Daniel dealing with the times of the Gentiles. We're not going to cover that information, but if you'd like to cover it yourself, study it yourself. In Daniel 8, we get the vision of the ram and the goat. There, the kingdom of Medo-Persia is the ram, and the kingdom of Greece is the male goat. So you can even pick up more information about the times of the Gentiles there. All right, so now we move from Daniel chapter 2, verses 32 to 45. Now we move over to Daniel chapter 7, verses 23 through 27. And remember, these two chapters are organically linked. They're not floating around independent of each other in the universe, okay? There may be 4 chapters in between the two of them. Chapter 2 is chiastically linked to chapter 7. Chapter 2 speaking of the 4 Gentile empires. Chapter 7, again, speaking of the 4 Gentile empires. Remember, this is all united together and organically connected. All right. Now, in chapter 7, Daniel sees a vision. Now, what did he see? We'll summarize what he saw, and then we'll look at the meaning of it, the interpretation of it. First of all, he saw a lion-like beast. This spoke of Babylonian autocracy. And this beast came out of the sea. Excuse me. Yes, it came out of the sea. And then next he saw a bear-like beast. This spoke of Medo-Persian oligarchy. Medo-Persian oligarchy. Then he saw a leopard-like beast, which speaks of Hellenistic democracy. And then he viewed a composite beast, a beast made up of all these governments. There's a little bit of autocracy in it. There's a little bit of oligarchy in it. There's a little bit of democracy in it. And there's a bit of republicanism in it as well. This is the 4th beast. This is Rome and Rome's imperialism. Rome's imperialism. Now, as Daniel looks at this beast, his attention is drawn to the 10 horns that project from the head of the beast. And in particular, his attention is drawn to a smaller horn, a little horn that comes up in the midst of the 10. So that is what Daniel saw. Now, the angel is going to dig deeper into the vision, and we're going to get a detailed interpretation of the vision in verses 23 through 27. So we're at point 4 on your exegetical notes, the section of your notes dealing with this. So we start with point 4a, the 4th beast, imperialism. And this is in chapter 7, verses 23 through 26. Now this is a very, very important statement I'm going to make now. It's a mark it up moment. Write it down, whatever. The major characteristic of the 4th empire is change. Rome, imperialism, whatever you want to call it. The major characteristic of this 4th empire is change. This empire will go through 5 stages and will be made up of multiple governments. Do you understand that now? This is very important. Keep this in mind. The major characteristic of the 4th empire is change. It never died. It does not have to be reborn. It does not have to be resurrected. We are part of this empire today. You and I are living in the midst of it. So let's take a look at this 4th empire of imperialism. It begins with the united stage, which is the Roman Empire itself. Verse 23, first part of the verse. Thus he said, the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms. All right, it's a 4th kingdom upon the earth. This is not something spiritual. It's very real. And it's going to be different. It's going to be diverse from all the other kingdoms. Why? Because Rome introduced imperialism and republicanism. This was a unique governmental system. What is imperialism? I'm sorry if you feel I'm repeating myself. I want you to have this information cemented in your head. this definition. Imperialism is the policy of extending a nation's authority by territorial acquisition, step 1, or by the establishment of, stage 2, economic and political hegemony over other nations. Now, let's take a look at Dr. Fruchtenbaum's explanation of imperialism, why it was a unique governmental system. We covered this before a few weeks back, but it's important that we cover it again. Let's review it. Dr. Fruchtenbaum writes, "What made the Fourth Empire, beginning with Rome, different from all previous empires? The key difference was in the type of government initiated by Rome, which was the government of imperialism. When the Babylonians conquered an area, they did not set up Babylonian rulers, but they set up nationals to rule. In its conquest of Judah, Babylon first set up Zedekiah, and later Gedaliah was appointed to rule, 2 Jewish men. Under Medo-Persia, the same thing was done. The Jewish governors, such as Zerubbabel and Nehemiah, ruled. Third kingdom, the Hellenists, worked in the same way. Instead of sending in Greeks to rule, they allowed the Jewish high priests to rule throughout the period of Greek domination, Hellenists. But Rome, here's number 4, but Rome began a new system called imperialism. This was what made the Fourth Empire diverse, different from all the others. When Rome conquered, Romans were sent in to rule. Example, Pontius Pilate, Felix, Festus. This was the policy of imperialism. Thus, a better name for the Fourth Empire would be imperialism rather than Rome. For Rome was merely the first of what? 5 stages of the Fourth Empire of imperialism. All right, very unique governmental system. All right, let's move now to the one world government stage. Started out in the United stage. It'll then move to the one world government stage. That's the next thing coming up. Verse 23, second part of the verse, it will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. So, stage 2 of imperialism began when Rome's territorial acquisition began to break up. And remember, stage 2 is political and economic hegemony over the entire world. He says, it will devour the whole earth. Now, Daniel chapter 2 mentions a 2-division stage, but here we jump to a worldwide stage. So the 2-division stage is there. Remember, Daniel mentioned this. The imperialism, stage 1, was territorial acquisition. There's the entire Roman Empire. It got so big it couldn't continue. And then they had to move to stage 2 of imperialism, exhibiting economic and political hegemony over other nations. And so the Roman Empire eventually split in 2. The Eastern Roman Empire, capital at Byzantium, Western Roman Empire, capital at Rome. And then it began to exhibit economic and political hegemony over the rest of the world. So we have jumped over the 2-division stage in the book, in the chapter 7, and we've gone to the one world stage. Remember, there's a 2-division stage there first. We'll look at that in just a second. So point 2, Roman numeral 1, he says that this kingdom will cover the whole earth. Note that. This is very important. I want you to highlight that. This kingdom will go worldwide. The term whole earth means exactly that. Whole earth, universal in scope. And you see on your outline a number of sections of Scripture that use that same terminology. For example, Isaiah 6:3. And one called out to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Okay, not part of the earth. The whole earth is under God's glory. And Zechariah 4:14. Then he said, "These are the 2 anointed ones who are standing by the Lord of" who? The whole earth. God is not the Lord of part of the earth. And so this kingdom is going to go worldwide. The 4th kingdom, Rome, imperialism, is going to go worldwide. Now, in the first stage, Roman numeral 2 here, Rome did not conquer the whole world under the first stage of imperialism. In fact, Rome did not conquer the known world under the first stage of imperialism. That's as far as they could go. That's as far as they could go. Europe and North Africa and the Middle East. And Rome still has not conquered the entire world. But it is just about succeeded. It is just about conquered the known world through political and economic hegemony. It's just about there, you guys. And when it does conquer the whole world, it's going to tread it down and break it in pieces. And this is a reference to the Antichrist's brutal government. When Antichrist takes over and the whole world is under his control, it is going to be bad. You think ISIS is bad today? You think Boko Haram is bad today? You think Assad in Syria is bad today? They're going to look like Boy Scouts compared to the Antichrist. All right, now let's move to point 3, double parentheses 3, the 10 division stage. Here's a reference to the 10 toes of Daniel 2 and the 10 horns of Daniel 7. They're both representing the same thing. Daniel 7:24, first part of the verse. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise. So a 10 division stage arises out of the one world government. And these kingdoms are worldwide in nature, in scope. Now, a lot of prophecy experts are looking for a revived Roman Empire, a revived Europe united to fulfill this 10 division breakdown, this 10 division stage. But they ignore the fact that this 10 division stage arises out of a one world government and is worldwide in nature. You know, this is still the fourth kingdom. This is still Roman imperialism and republicanism. And so to limit your thinking to just the common market in Europe, it doesn't fit the biblical data. There's something that does fit the biblical data more exactly, and that's the idea of continental unions. Now, if you go to Wikipedia and look up continental unions, you'll come to an article that describes continental unions. What is a continental union? A continental union, often abbreviated to CU, is an intragovernmental, supranational federation of member states located on the same continent or close to it. Continental unions are a relatively new type of political entity in the history of human government. And he's totally right. It's fair, and that fits the biblical message, because Rome is diverse. It's different. The fourth kingdom is diverse. It's different. It's new. And so continental union fits that whole motif of newness and change in the fourth kingdom. Now, if you look at that article a little deeper, you'll see that there are existing continental unions today. There are 3 of them. There's the African Union. It includes all of African countries except Morocco. Then there's the European Union. We're very familiar with that. It includes 27 European countries out of 47, not just 10. It includes 27 European countries, 1 Asian country, Cyprus, and territories in South America and Africa. And then there's the Union of South American Nations. It includes all of continental South America except French Guiana. So continental unions do exist today. But those who are proposing this kind of governmental system for the world have proposed the idea that we need to break up these continental unions and make them a little more coordinate with the areas that they rule. So a number of proposed continental unions have come forth. Guess how many have been proposed? Just guess. The first one that's been proposed is the Asia Cooperation Dialogue. Secondly, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Thirdly, the Central American Integration System. Fourthly, the Central Asian Union. Fifthly, the North American Union. That's where the United States would fit in. Sixthly, the Pacific Union. Seventh, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. 8, the Cooperation Council for the Arab States in the Gulf. 9, an Arab Union. And guess what? The very last one, number 10, Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. They're not proposing 9 continental unions. They're not proposing 11 continental unions. Is it a surprise? Should it be a surprise to us that they are proposing 10 continental unions? Well, that may or may not come to pass. We'll see. Only the future will let us know. But this kind of an idea, 10 continental unions, and here's a map of the continental unions that I've just described. 10 continental unions, like described on this map, is more in line with the biblical description and biblical expectations of the final empire, of the final kingdom. This whole idea cannot be limited to Europe. It cannot be limited to the common market. And as I said, this is still a very common approach. And here's a couple of statements by prophecy people. If you go to Contender Ministries, you'll read this. The EU today is made up of over 25 countries. However, now we've got to somehow figure out and make this work, the 10 nation revived European, the European Union, or revived Roman Empire, excuse me. It's made up of over 25 countries. However, the 10 nations of the Western European Alliance have a separate status as full members. Aha! See, that's my out. 10 full members. While the nations who joined subsequent to the original 10 have only associate membership or observer status. This 10-nation military wing of the EU may very well fulfill the prophecy of the beast with 10 horns from Daniel 7, 7 and 8, and Revelation 13:1. Well, folks, I'm sorry. This is not a worldwide kingdom. This 10-nation military wing is not worldwide in nature. Doesn't fit the biblical data. In the Jerusalem Post-Christian edition, this article showed up called The New Kings and Queens of Europe, September 2008, page 42. And here's what the writer proposes. Here's what the writer said. French President Nicolas Sarkozy, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and others in July have engineered a new collective entity called the Mediterranean Union. This proposed new union will embrace North Africa, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and at some point fold them into the European Union, and then presto, we have the old Roman Empire resurrected. See, this whole viewpoint is on the Roman Empire being resurrected. Well, folks, I'm sorry, it doesn't fit the biblical data. This is not worldwide. The Roman Empire only was located around the Mediterranean. It did not go worldwide. Okay, well, let's see. How much time? Let's finish up verse 24. And I see we're coming to the end of our time. We'll finish up verse 24, and then we'll start again next week with verse 25. All right. Looking at the Antichrist in verse 24, second part of the verse, we look at the rise of the Antichrist. And another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. So he arises after the 10 division stage is established. So don't bother to look for the Antichrist now, you guys. Possibly he's on the scene. But we won't know who he is until after the 10 division stage is established. Now it's possible we may see this. But don't try to speculate who the Antichrist is now. We'll know when that happens. You can start speculating after the 10 division worldwide stage is reached by the 4th kingdom. Secondly, he will be diverse from the other 10 kings. He's going to be distinct and different and unique. He's not going to be your average leader or politician. I think it won't be too hard to pick him out. And point 3, he shall put down 3 kings. Now this Aramaic word put down or subdue carries the idea of violence and hostility. So he's going to displace 3 of the world leaders, 3 of the kingdoms through violence and hostility. And then, when he successfully does that, the other 7 political divisions, the other 7 sub-kingdoms of this final empire will submit to him. They'll submit to him. And so, we now come to verse 25, and I see we've just come to the end of our time. So we'll pick it up on verse 25 with his activities. So I bid you goodbye. We'll see you next session.